He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good. So be good, for goodness sake. These are the words associated with a jolly old man with a rounded belly and a big white beard. He is often depicted in red, with black boots, a black belt, and white trimming, flying around the world on his sleigh, led by the magic of his reindeer that have been entrusted with the ability to fly. I grew up knowing him by the name of Father Christmas, although I understand him also to be known as Santa Claus by many worldwide due to the American Christmas holiday films that would return each year. He has many names and styles, with many traditions and beliefs that differ from country to country or even town to town. He is one of the most recognizable figures in most cultures worldwide. Even those who do not celebrate Christmas will recognize his image in some capacity. To some out there, though, he is not alone in his travels. And according to them, you better hope that he comes for you, because if he doesn't, that means that something far worse is coming in his place. My name is Luke Mordew, and this urban legend is Krampus. I was always told that if I were not good throughout the year, I would find lumps of coal in my stocking at the end of my bed rather than toys and chocolates. It was a genuine concern for me at my more troublesome times. I remember worrying that I would receive no gifts that year, being left out of the excitement and fun whilst my brothers played. I also remember worrying that I would be letting Father Christmas down. Disappointing such a jolly and kind man was a terrifying thing. Santa Claus represents goodness in people, a manifestation of a time of year that celebrates family, friendship, and goodwill to all. It is a time of year when you can spoil those you love and share your appreciation amongst them, giving you permission to indulge in any of the acts we may hold off from most of the year. Christmas is a celebration amongst the darkness of winter, a festival in the last week of the year. It has evolved into many guises, morphing from a solstice celebration to a day honoring the birth of a god. Now it seems to be morphing again, quickly becoming more about time with family and friends. However, these old traditions have slowly stuck to it. They come from different parts of the world, venturing out of different ideologies and belief systems, merging to become a holiday that is a mishmash of festivities from around the world. The belief in Krampus amongst children resided in only Austria, parts of Germany, and a few connected countries. However, in recent years, the legend of this devil of Christmas has begun to emerge in new lands. Films, Christmas cards, books, stories, and celebrations have introduced the demonic figure into different cultures over the past decade. It seems to be the case that pretty soon, the legend of Krampus will be amongst many of us every year whilst we lay our heads to sleep on the eve of Christmas. In my telling of a story based on the beliefs of Krampus, we will follow Anthony, who is playing video games, trying to make the day go by faster to ensure the speedy arrival of the following morning. It was Christmas Eve, a time of excitement and joy for all the little boys and girls across England and afar. Brothers Anthony and Lewis had compiled their Christmas list together many weeks ago, already mentally preparing for the day when the Halloween decorations were still up. Now was the time to be on their best behavior. This much they knew, or at least Anthony did. He'd already packed away his toys and clothes, ensuring all the dirty items were in the washing basket, whilst all the shoes were neatly tucked away by the front door. He ensured no action figures were lying across the ground and that no sweet wrappers or food had been left out on any of the surfaces. Usually, doing their chores was neither of the boys' strengths. Making excuses to avoid getting on with it was a far more common outcome throughout most of the year. But this time, Anthony knew that Santa was watching. It was far too close to Christmas for him to take any chances. So he got out of bed and immediately began cleaning his room. This worked out in his favor in two ways, or at least, in his mind it did. Firstly, he has done a last-minute good deed, ensuring that he would be on Santa's good list. Secondly, by the time he sat down to play video games, it was already the afternoon, meaning the day was flying by and Christmas morning was closer than ever. Lewis, who was 2 years older than Anthony, had recently gone on to secondary school as a year 7, venturing dangerously close to his teenage years. And with this was coming a whole new side of him. He was yet to do any of his chores, still procrastinating in Anthony's room, watching his brother sitting on the floor playing video games whilst he sat on his phone. Being older, he had more jobs to do, as not only did he need to clean his own room, but he also had to hoover the entire house, upstairs and down. "Can I have a go after you?" Lewis asked as he watched Anthony's avatar die in the game. "No," Anthony snapped back, refusing to change his plans. "You should be doing chores anyway." Lewis sighed before sitting at the end of the bed, looking down at Anthony. "Well, what if you hoovered upstairs whilst I cleaned my room, and then I hoovered downstairs? We could play together then?" Anthony was having none of this, turning back to the game with a simple "no" before adding, "Mum told you to do it, not me." Before Lewis could even respond to this disappointment, the bedroom door flung open as their mum entered with a frustrated intent burning around her entire demeanor. She scanned the room and sighed with a smile. "Thank you, Anthony, for cleaning your room. It looks really good," she announced, making it clear to them that the address was to Anthony and Anthony alone. She turned to Lewis and pointed to the hallway outside. "I'm slaving away, preparing Christmas dinner down there. Your brother's done his room. Come on, it's time to crack on." With this, she turned and began to leave the room. But before she could, Lewis had already responded. "But why do only I have to hoover?" She stopped, turning to him again, clearly frustrated by the fact that he would question her today of all days. "Because you're the oldest, and I've asked you to," she said calmly but firmly, before turning and leaving the room. Still, in a classic case of not knowing when to quit, Lewis paced out of the room after her, continuing his case, claiming that Anthony wasn't a baby and could do things as well. It wasn't that Anthony disagreed with this. It was just that Lewis was objectively older and got more tasks due to this. Even Anthony, at his young age, knew that with time came more responsibility. But all Lewis could see was injustice. The fight continued outside Anthony's bedroom as Lewis closed the door behind him, shouting down the stairs to his mum, who sounded as though she was now standing on the bottom step. Anthony tried to continue playing his game, but was noticeably distracted by the debate that had quickly turned into an argument in the hallway. It was here that Anthony heard something that seemed to surprise everybody in the house. Lewis began to swear at his mother, causing her to charge up the stairs towards him, where the argument would turn into a fight. Anthony quickly reached forward and grabbed the large headphones that rested beside his games console, sliding them over his head to allow the music and sound effects of the game to blast out into his ears, blocking most of the shouting that was now occurring in the room next door. He tried to focus on the game again, telling himself this wasn't his fight and he had done all of his chores. Although, he knew deep down that it wasn't true. He turned his head to see the mess under his bed frame, where he had brushed much of his toys and muck away. Not clean and tidy, but simply pushed out of sight. This was an old trick that his mum would usually check and find out, but he gave it his best shot anyway. And luckily for him, the anger she felt towards Lewis meant that she was blinded by the blatant deception in front of her. Hours had passed, and Anthony now lay sleeping in his bed, whilst his brother Lewis rested under his duvet on the floor beside him. Like every other year, they wanted to wake up on Christmas morning together, like they used to do when they were little. The atmosphere in the house had cooled since its fiery eruption that afternoon. However, the awkwardness still hung in the air until the moment they had gone to sleep. Their mum had tried to forgive and move on from the events, letting it go for the sake of Christmas. The night was silent, bar the occasional whistle of the cold winds that blew down the street outside. It was as if the whole country was asleep in preparation for the next day. That was until Lewis's whispers began to emit from the floor as he called, Anthony! Anthony slowly rolled over in his sleepy state, turning to his brother, who was lying on the floor, wide awake, staring up at him. Anthony looked up at the digital clock on the side, spotting the red glowing numbers that read 1:37 a.m., knowing it was far too early to get up, and now he may struggle to get back to sleep thanks to his brother. Although this frustration was disturbed by the following words that came out of Lewis's mouth as he said, "I think Santa's here." Anthony sat up, looking down at his brother, who was trying to seem calm and relaxed about his discovery, although clearly excited by the notion. Anthony's mind had raced from confusion to excitement to annoyance as he began to establish that it was far more likely that Lewis was playing a Christmas prank on him. Still, before he could open his mouth to respond, he heard a loud thud bang on the roof above their heads. They both paused as they listened to the slow and steady footsteps thudding through the ceiling above. One step heavy, the other higher, almost as if one foot was harder than the other. "How will he get in?" Anthony asked his brother with concern. "We don't have a chimney." Lewis smiled enthusiastically before whispering back, "Well, he always manages it somehow." And with that, there was a sudden, loud clang of heavy metal against the floor outside the hallway. He was now inside the house. "See?" Lewis exclaimed in an excitable whisper as he jumped to his feet, creeping towards the bedroom door as silently as he could manage. He tiptoed towards the wood and placed his hand against the wall, slowly bending down to peer through the old keyhole that led out onto the landing. On the other hand, Anthony did not move from his bed. Something was strange about what was going on that night. He had never seen or heard Santa Claus before. But that hard thud that echoed through the house was not a sweet jingling of bells, but a heavy, metallic clang. Lewis didn't care, too excited by the events unfolding before him to consider anything amiss, as he turned back to Anthony with a smile, beckoning his brother over to him with a wave of his hand. Anthony didn't move, gripping his bedsheets tightly as he noticed his breath appearing in front of his face, as if a window had been left open inside. "I can see him," Lewis whispered with excitement, before turning back to the keyhole to get a better look, as he continued to describe the sight to his little brother. "He's wearing red," he exclaimed excitedly. He looks quite dirty," he added, now growing confused by it, causing Anthony to grip the sheets tighter as his breathing grew heavier. "He's huge," Lewis whispered, now growing more confused as he described what he could see. Lewis began to explain something else, but stopped in his tracks for a moment before whispering, "It looks like horns." Anthony leant forward, begging Lewis to get away from the door whilst maintaining a panicked whisper. But his brother didn't listen, instead whispering, "Wait, he's turning this way." There was a moment's pause where Anthony watched his brother, wishing he could see what he could see, too afraid to move from where he was, before Lewis finally stood up straight, turning to Anthony with tears filling his eyes. He stared back at his scared little brother and shook his head, finally saying with a whimper, "That's not Santa." With this, Lewis began to pace towards Anthony's bed, but before he could fully return to the room, the bedroom door flung open with force. Anthony lifted the duvet that he gripped in his hands above his head the moment Lewis let out a scream of fear, hiding away from whatever it was on the other side of that door. The room filled with a bitterly cold air, as if a blizzard had blown its way in from the shadow. Lewis screamed for Anthony's help as the sounds of Christmas bells mixed with the heavy clunks of metal slamming against the floor around them. Anthony did not move, sitting in the cold dark under the safety of his bed covers as his brother's cries grew more distant whilst being dragged back into the hall. Lewis continued to scream for both his brother and his mum, but she did not come. It was as if she could not hear a single thing that was happening. Anthony remained sat, crying and shaking as the screams disappeared, leaving the house in silence once again. He slowly pulled the sheets from above his head and peeked around the room, only lit by the glow of the soft moonlight outside and the red digital clock by the television. The room was freezing cold, with ice already forming on the inside of the glass behind him. The bedroom door was still wide open, but now on the other side was nothing but shadow, whilst Lewis's bedsheets remained on the floor, just as he had left them. Anthony was trembling, partly due to the cold, primarily due to the intense fear he felt rushing through his veins, contaminating every thought he had. He called out to Lewis again in a faint whisper, stumbling over his words as they crackled out of his mouth. But there was no response. He desperately hoped that this was, in fact, the finale of a cruel Christmas prank his brother was playing on him. He crawled forward and leaned over the bed. He peeked into the shadow of the landing that now sat so silently and waited for a moment to see if Lewis would return before placing one foot on the ground. He crept forward, now placing both feet on the floor as he slowly edged towards the bedroom door, still hoping for his brother's re-emergence. But as he took one more step away from the comfort of his bed, he froze in fear once again, now seeing that the hallway was, in fact, not empty at all. Out of the shadow and into the faint glow of the moonlight stepped forward a human-like foot, covered in dark brown hair that looked black in the darkness, followed by its second foot, this one a cloven hoof like that of a goat. The creature now stepped forward, towering over Anthony with its immense stature, a beastly, hairy, demonic-like figure with a long, sharp tongue that swayed out of its unnervingly wide smile, its yellow eyes fixated on Anthony's trembling face, glaring at him as if Anthony was to be a delicious snack. It was cloaked in a dark red, soot-covered and torn robe that wrapped around it with binds of metal chains that it had fastened Christmas bells to, whilst its tall stature was enlarged further by the two large horns that reached out of its head, curling behind and twisting like a demon. Anthony stepped back. The monster stepped forward. He stepped back again. The monster stepped forward. He didn't know what was happening or what this creature was, but it had just taken his brother away, and it now seemed to want to do the same to him. Although, much to his confusion, the beast turned its head, reaching out with its long, powerful, sharp fingers and grabbing Anthony's bed frame. It quickly pushed the bed away as if it were as light as a feather, revealing the mess that Anthony had hidden underneath it. At this sight, the creature chuckled with a menacing deep growl as it turned back to Anthony again, whose eyes were filled with tears, his entire body still shaking and frozen. The creature's smile widened further as its tongue began to dance towards Anthony like a snake. With its other large hand, it reached out to him with a collection of sticks wrapped together with golden string. Anthony stared at what seemed to be a gift for a moment before looking back at the beast's yellow eyes that still glared into his. It tutted, lifting a finger and wagging it in front of Anthony's face as a warning, almost mocking the young boy as it chuckled under its breath once again. Anthony placed his hand on the sticks in the creature's giant black palms and took them from him, gripping them tightly as the beast smiled one last time before turning back to the bedroom door and lunging forward, disappearing into the shadows in an instant. Anthony stood there for a while before finally looking down at the bundle of sticks in his hand, now noticing the Christmas tag attached to the golden string that held them together. He lifted it to the moonlight to study it, where he saw that on the card was simply written, "Remember, I'll be watching." Around the world, there have long been celebrations in the middle of winter. Long before the times of Immaculate Conception and the apparent arrival of baby Jesus, Europeans were celebrating light and birth on the darkest of days. Many celebrated what is known as the winter solstice, a time where the worst of the winter was behind them, and they could finally look forward to expanded days and extended hours of sunlight. As the days slowly but surely grew longer, the Norse celebrated what was known as Yule, from the 21st of December through to January. Around this time of year, most cattle were slaughtered in many areas of Europe. This would mean that the livestock would not need to be fed during hard times. And for many, this was the only time of year when they had a supply of fresh meat. In Rome, where the winters were not as harsh as those in the northern parts of Europe, they celebrated Saturnalia, a holiday in honor of Saturn, the god of agriculture, beginning in the week leading up to the winter solstice and continuing for a month. In addition, the more wealthy people of Rome often celebrated the birthday of Mithra, the god of the unconquerable sun, on the 25th of December. Later, Pope Julius III chose the 25th of December as the date to celebrate the birth of Christ, as before then, there was never a specific time of year or date depicted for the birth in the Bible. It is commonly accepted that the Church chose this date for logical reasons. By placing it here, it could be quickly adopted and would absorb the traditions already in place of the pagan Saturnalia festival. This was first called the Feast of the Nativity and spread to Egypt. Eventually, it ventured to England by the end of the 6th century. It made sense from a political point of view. By holding Christmas at the same time as traditional winter solstice festivals, church leaders increased the chances that Christmas would be embraced, and by the Middle Ages, Christianity had, for the most part, almost completely replaced the pagan religion. Christmas here was a raucous occasion, with a drunken carnival-like atmosphere comparable to today's Mardi Gras. In a tradition reminiscent of carol singing, although more like that of trick-or-treating at Halloween, the poorer people would go to the houses of the rich and demand their best food and drink. If the owners failed to comply at this time, their visitors would terrorize them with mischievous antics. In the 17th century, Oliver Cromwell and his Puritan forces took over the lands of England in 1645 and vowed to rid England of decadence, and as part of these efforts, cancelled Christmas. Later, Charles I would be restored to the throne, and with him would come the return of the popular holiday once more. Although, the pilgrims that left the shores of England for North America in 1620 were even more orthodox in their Puritan beliefs than even Cromwell, and as a result, Christmas was non-existent in the lands of North America. In some places, such as Boston, it was even a finable offence of 5 shillings if anyone was to exhibit any Christmas spirit. And after the American Revolution, English customs fell out of favour, and this included Christmas. It was not until the 1800s that the Americans began to embrace Christmas fully. However, now they had reinvented it, changing it from an exciting, carnival-like holiday and turning it into a family-centered day of peace and nostalgia. Finally, as recent as the 26th of June, 1870, Christmas was declared a federal holiday. It was around this time that English author Charles Dickens wrote the classic holiday tale, A Christmas Carol. The overall message of the importance of goodwill towards others struck a chord with the people of the United States and the United Kingdom, showing members of both societies the benefits of celebrating Christmas. It was also around this time that the families opened their minds to a more sensitive and emotional aspect of raising children. Christmas Day provided families with a time where they could lavish their kids with gifts and affection without going as far as to spoil them. Over the next several decades, the Americans and British would continue to build holiday traditions. This involved taking parts of different cultures' holidays and blending them into the mixing bowl of Christmas, including Christmas trees, crackers, stockings, and the legendary man in red, Santa Claus himself. The legend of Santa Claus can be traced back to around 280 AD. At this time, in what would later become the country of Turkey, a monk by the name of Saint Nicholas was born. However, as he grew up, it is said that he became known for giving away all of his inherited wealth, instead using his time traveling the country to help the sick and poor. Due to these acts of kindness, he became known as the protector of children and sailors. Many years later, in December 1773 and again in 1774, a New York newspaper reported on groups of Dutch families gathering together to honor the anniversary of his death on the 6th of December. This was the first time the man as we know him to be was mentioned on the shores of the USA, referenced as Santa Claus, a nickname of its full name, Sint Nicholas, which in itself is simply Dutch for Saint Nicholas. And it's not hard to see how the Dutch nickname of Sinterklaas became Santa Claus amongst the English-speaking people of North America. By 1822, Episcopal minister Clement Clark Moore wrote the now famous poem titled An Account of a Visit from Saint Nicholas, which is nowadays more recognized by its opening line, "'Twas the night before Christmas." In this poem, the now Santa Claus was depicted as a jolly man who spent the night of Christmas Eve flying from home to home on a sledge driven by reindeer, where he would place toys for the children when they awoke. A story that has been spread about the appearance of Santa Claus is somewhat of a miniature urban legend in itself, with many believing that it was, in fact, Coca-Cola that transformed our previously green Christmas saint into a bright red, bearded man. In truth, it was not until 1931 that Coca-Cola hired the illustrator Haddon Sundblom to create an image of Santa Claus to advertise that their drink could be used all year round and not just during the hot summer months. The years before this, the now iconic version of Santa Claus in his red getup was created by the political cartoonist Thomas Nast in 1881 for Harper's Weekly, drawing upon Moore's poem just as Sundblom would do years later. Santa Claus in red is relatively new in its existence, being depicted in green, blue, mustard yellow, or even purple throughout the 19th century. In England, the names of Santa Claus and Father Christmas are synonymous with each other, although they were not always the same. Father Christmas dates as far back as the 16th century in Britain during the reign of Henry VIII, where he was pictured as a large man in green or scarlet robes lined with fur. He was known to be the spirit of good cheer at Christmas, bringing peace joy, good food and wine to the joyous occasion. By this point, England no longer celebrated the feast day of St. Nicholas on the 6th of December, leaving only Christmas. And by this time, Christmas had been revived in the Victorian era. He had arrived as an emblem of Christmas joy and good cheer. You have most likely seen him depicted several times before without even realizing it. As you noticed, the ghost of Christmas Present in Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol looked strangely similar to a Victorian-like Santa. However, before the tales of Father Christmas and Santa Claus, there were stories of St. Nicholas for many years, and although they weren't as big, camp and magical as he would later become, they were still outlandish in their own right. There were tales of him saving 3 sisters from being sold into slavery and prostitution by throwing coins into their window at night, and tales of him bringing 3 children back to life after they were murdered, cut up, and boiled by a cannibal. His stories were told in several cultures, and his kindness was lauded by many as the best of us. And this is what brought about the feast day of the 6th of December. This was now a long-standing tradition, with St. Nicholas even being the most popular saint in Europe by the Renaissance period of history. This was now a long-standing tradition, with St. Nicholas even being the most popular saint in Europe by the Renaissance period of history. Even after the Protestant Reformation, when the veneration of saints was discouraged, St. Nicholas maintained a positive reputation amongst the people, especially in Holland. You may be asking yourself why I've spoken so much about Father Christmas, St. Nicholas and Santa Claus, when I should be delving into the history of Krampus. But you see, before we can look into the existence of this darker side of the Christmas spirit, we must first understand the origin of the time itself. Only then can we truly appreciate this strange and devilish being. If you're still with me, then I know you share the same passion for folklore and urban legends that drives this show. But to keep bringing you these stories, I need your help. Every season comes to life with the incredible support of listeners like you on Patreon. For just £3 a month, less than the price of a small coffee, you can help ensure that this show continues to thrive, with shorter breaks between seasons and even more content available. But that's not all. As a Patreon subscriber, you'll unlock exclusive perks like access to our bonus series, Modern Myths, where we dive into lesser-known but equally captivating tales like the Hodag, Black-Eyed Children, the Dark Watchers, and many more. You'll gain instant access to our entire library of bonus content the moment you join, with new chapters coming each season. You'll also get a behind-the-scenes look at how the show is made, discounts on merchandise, and an invitation to our private group chat, where you can connect with me directly and share your love for urban legends with a community of like-minded enthusiasts. Plus, as a special treat, I randomly select patrons to feature in upcoming stories, so you might find yourself becoming part of the very legends we explore. Supporting us on Patreon isn't just about subscribing. It's about joining a team dedicated to preserving and expanding on our collection of folklore. Your contribution directly fuels the research, production, and growth of the show, helping us continue this incredible journey together. So, if you're ready to take the next step and become an integral part of the Urban Legends community, head over to our Patreon page via the link in our show notes and choose the paid subscription. I'm looking forward to seeing you there, where we can keep these tales alive. And now, back to the legend. To this day, the Feast of St. Nicholas is still celebrated in parts of Europe on the 6th of December. In many of these places, this happens as well as on Christmas Day rather than instead of. It is on the 6th of December, that the little boys and girls of these areas are given small gifts in remembrance of St. Nicholas, with some doing gifts only on the 6th, whilst others only on the 25th, and others doing a few small ones on the 6th, before giving more in full once the 25th comes around. We all know of the night before Christmas, affectionately known as Christmas Eve, the night where Santa Claus, also known as Father Christmas, climbs down our chimneys to drop off presents. But the night before the feast of St. Nicholas, the 5th of December, is an eve just the same, although far darker in its ideas. That night has been called amongst those that know the tales as Krampusnacht, translating as Krampus Night. A night where a vicious, horned, devil-like creature covered in hair appears on your streets, searching for and hunting the bad children in the area. He is often depicted as having brown or black fur covering his skin, with one cloven hoof, one human foot, and large horns out of his head. He is consistently known to have a long, pointed tongue that lolls out of his mouth. He controls this with menacing movements between his sharp, pointed teeth. Some have suggested that his appearance is inspired by the horror and fantasy novella, The Great God Pan. He is known to carry chains around his body, a contribution that is thought to be added by the Christian Church to symbolize the binding of the devil. They knew that if Krampus was going to continue amongst folklore, they needed to bind it symbolically and metaphorically. He is known to thrash these chains dramatically, causing loud, sharp bangs to echo all around him, whilst the bells of various sizes dangle from the metal, jingling in the recognizable sound of Santa's more merry bells. In its pagan description, Krampus is said to carry a bundle of birch branches that he would use to whip, swat, and beat children. On his back, he is sometimes described as carrying a sack or a basket, a tool he would use to take away evil children to eat, drown, or transport to the underworld as punishment. Like many other aspects of our popular holidays, Krampus was originally purely a pagan creation. Some suggest that he was initially known to be the son of Hel, the goddess of death in Norse mythology, making him the grandson of Loki, the god of mischief. Once again, like many other aspects of popular holidays, he was eventually grafted onto the celebrations of Christian traditions and would become, to some, a partnership alongside St. Nicholas. Krampus is not the only figure said to work with St. Nicholas in Europe, with Knecht Ruprecht in some places of Germany. There is also Zwart Piet, translating as Black Pete, the Dutch counterpart who has caused controversy in recent years, as its design is strikingly similar to that of the racist act of blackface. It does seem throughout that they are all variations of the same part of folklore, and, perhaps due to its dramatic, dark and cinematic-like design, Krampus seems to be the one that is spreading as the yin to St. Nicholas's yang, a dark companion amongst Christmas's shadow. It is said that on the 5th of December, the night of Krampusnacht, St. Nicholas and Krampus will venture from house to house, and whilst St. Nicholas will reward the well-behaved children with modest gifts, such as walnuts, chocolates, oranges, or dried fruit left in their shoes, Krampus will sneak into the rooms of the badly behaved children and beat them with his birch rods. At times, he will even go as far as to take the worst of the children away to either be tortured, killed, or eaten. In some less extreme variations of the tale, it is Krampus that leaves behind coal instead of gifts, occasionally leaving behind the bundle of birch rods for the parents to do as they deem fit. In the state of Styria amongst Austria, The left-behind twigs are painted gold and displayed somewhere around the house throughout the following year as a reminder to any child who may temporarily forget Krampus's existence through spring and summer. In some of the smaller towns in this area, Krampus does not work alone on the darker side of Christmas, having his own elves of sorts, smaller, wild man-like beings. In more urban places, such as Salzburg, Krampus has become part of the famous Christmas markets, where he appears as a far more toned-down variation of the legend. In these more tourist-friendly depictions of the being, Krampus is deemed to be more cheeky and humorous than fearsome. In many parts of Slovenia, a place greatly affected by Austrian culture, Krampus exists under the name of Parkel and is one of the companions of Miklaj, the Slovenian variant of Saint Nicholas. In Croatia, Krampus is described by some as a devil wearing a cloth sack around his waist and chains around his neck and limbs. Here, it is tradition for a child to receive a golden branch to represent their good deeds throughout the year alongside their gifts. However, if the child has misbehaved, Krampus will steal the gift for himself and leave behind only a silver branch. The origins of this beastly Christmas devil are said to have come from Germany, with his name deriving from the German word Krampon, which translates to claw. Theories suggest that he was initially there to be part of pagan rituals for the winter solstice. However, with the spread of Christianity, he began, like St. Nicholas, to merge with the traditions of Christmas, despite the Catholic Church's efforts to ban his existence altogether. Krampus's frightening presence was suppressed as much as possible for many years, as the Catholic Church forbade the excitable celebrations in the 12th century, noting the being's resemblance to the devil. Between 1934 and 1938, when Austria was living under fascist rule, the Fatherland's Front and the Conservative Christian Social Party would play a large part in the dampening of Krampus's tale. They found the creature to be a despicable creation of the Social Democrats, representing sin and anti-Christian ideals. The newspaper of the Austrian Catholic Union called for a boycott of Krampus, whilst the government of the capital of East Tyrol, known as Lienz, made the bold statement that they would be arresting Krampus when he next arrived. In 1953, the head of Vienna's kindergarten system also released a pamphlet calling Krampus an evil man and warning parents that celebrating him could scar their children for life. But as much as these forces tried to demolish the folklore of Krampus amongst the people of Austria, he remained. Amongst the earlier days of the Alpine regions of Austria, a seasonal play would spread throughout the area known as a Nikolausspiel, meaning a Nicholas play. The Nikolausspiel featured aspects such as the competition for the human soul and played on questions of morality. In these plays, Saint Nicholas would reward children for their scholarly efforts rather than doing so due to good behavior. And for a good while, this was a consistent theme that grew amongst these regions where the Roman Catholic Church had significant influence. As I'm growing so used to saying when it comes to discussing any modern holiday, there were already pagan traditions in place amongst the Alpine regions that had become intertwined with Catholicism. Back then, people would masquerade as a devilish figure named Perched. This was a two-legged humanoid goat with a long neck cloaked in animal fur. People would dress this way and march in processions known as Perchtenlauf, which was eventually banned by several authorities under the Catholic Church. That said, due to the sparse population and rough environments within the Alpine regions, enforcing this ban was difficult and was thus rendered useless. Soon enough, the Perchtenlauf, inspired by the Nikolausspiel, would merge. Introducing St. Nicholas and his set of morals, the Perch transformed in folklore into the being that is now known as Krampus. The traditional parades became what is now known as Krampuslauf, translating in English to Krampus Run. In some areas of Austria, Slovenia, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Germany, these runs became and continue to become increasingly popular. On this night, young men dress up as Krampus and attempt to scare the parade audience with their antics, literally chasing and swatting the public. Much to some tourists' dismay when they arrive to witness the events. This celebration and the festival of Krampus has grown so fast in the past decade that it has also begun popping up in several cities across North America. Events are already being put on show in LA, Philadelphia, Portland, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Washington, D.C., and many more. This tradition is new amongst many, although it goes far beyond our expectations, with old Krampus costumes and masks being displayed in museums and worth a hefty price. With the pressure of a perfect Christmas day and the commercialization of gift-giving and receiving in many parts of the world, with the growing number of atheists looking to make Christmas their own without a church involved, it is no surprise that this exciting new creature has grown in popularity so fast. Krampus is the antithesis of anti-Christmas, whilst also being very much part of it. Not to destroy the holiday, but to add a much-needed freshness in the guise of darkness. To some, the idea of the devil of Christmas is not Christmas-like at all. But then again, I'm English, and in this country, telling ghost stories on Christmas Eve has been very much a part of our culture's tradition for many years. Let us not forget Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol's horror-like aspects. Suppose the day comes when I have children. In that case, I will most likely introduce Krampus into the mythology of our household at Christmas. Perhaps a more toned-down version of the events, mixed more into Christmas Eve rather than Krampusnacht, and I imagine many others will also. Perhaps in 100 years, Santa Claus and Krampus will go hand in hand amongst many households, as our traditions and folklore consistently change as time goes on. The beastly creature is featured in several films and has found itself in comic books, cartoons, songs, and artwork. Europeans have exchanged greeting cards featuring Krampus since the 19th century, usually alongside a humorous rhyme, phrase, or poem. Here, he is seen looming over children with menacing intent, often with one human foot and one cloven hoof. Even sexy variations of Krampus found themselves in the post, with Krampus pursuing busty women instead of badly behaved children. On some occasions, the artists would even go as far as to make Krampus themselves a sexy, voluptuous, devil-like woman. Now, there is a wide variety of options, from the more cute side of things to the darker and more menacing ones. It was in 2004 when the graphic designer Monte Beauchamp published a book of Krampus cards and helped organize an art show inspired by them in America. Before then, many had not witnessed this devil-like creature's existence, although it cannot be claimed that Beauchamp is solely responsible for introducing Krampus to the shores of North America. It has since continued to grow into a new tradition amongst many. Before Halloween is even over, the shelves are already being taken down and moved to the sales section, ensuring room for the greens, reds, whites, and golds to appear in the shop windows advertising new Christmas stock. One holiday cannot even be done before another is marketed and advertised to us. Christmas decorations on sale before Halloween is deemed ridiculous to many, often evoking the phrase, "It gets earlier and earlier each year." In November, we have Guy Fawkes Night in England, whilst North America has Thanksgiving. Yet our shops and stores are already jumping ahead to the end of the year. It is anxiety-inducing, and by the time Christmas comes, many of us may feel fatigued by the jingles and flashing lights. Perhaps Krampus is an opportunity to allow Halloween to seep into Christmas as Christmas does into it. Perhaps it is an opportunity to turn the darker side of Christmas into a new level of folklore. Perhaps it is just fun to imagine that there is something out there willing to punish those who try to spoil a Christmas for us with their overly capitalistic, aggressively commercial ways. Perhaps we all need a little bit of Krampus in our lives, as Santa Claus keeps tabs on our behaviors. Maybe we should just embrace it. After all, he could be watching us as well.
Urban Legends is researched, written and produced by Luke Mordew. Original score by Billy Jupp, with additional sounds from storyblocks.com. If you like what you heard and want to hear more, click subscribe on your chosen podcast provider and delve into the mysteries of our previous and future chapters. To find more, including merchandise, video content, images and more, visit urbanlegendsfolklore.com. If you have more information or a correction on something mentioned in this chapter, please get in touch through our website. We aim to ensure that all information provided is accurate and up to date, and this remains a top priority. If you want to support the show, receive early access, and have more of a say in what we do, then become a patron by clicking the link in our show notes. For these chapters in video format, simply search Urban Legends Folklore on YouTube. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and Threads, and join our Facebook group by searching Urban Legends Folklore.